I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P and you're watching the Cartoon Palooza. Today, as part of Dreamworks month, we're going to be talking about the Prince of Egypt. Means we're talking about religion, huh? It's going to get awkward, isn't it?
Remember back how I said every studio usually does well when establishing what their brand represents? Even though people like myself agree that Shrek set the tone of DreamWorks animation, the film that was planned to be the big DreamWorks movie was Prince of Egypt. Back when DreamWorks was getting their feet off the ground, founder and animation division CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg made it his quest to bring the biblical story of Moses back to the big screen. Heck, he even tried to get this off the ground at Disney when he was animation CEO for the House of Mouse.
Just imagine family-friendly entertainment with death, pestilence, more death, despair, and more pestilence. But it's all good, it's in the Bible, so we're fine.
Sounds like a crazy idea in hindsight, but given that the previous film Katzenberg oversaw at Disney were Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, making an animated film that attempts to deal with more sensual and violent themes was more accepted. Or else we wouldn't have seen the release of Hunchback of Notre Dame. Another mature and sensually suggestive movie that surprisingly managed to keep the G rating. Yeah, how about that? Prince of Egypt had to get the PG rating, and yet Hunchback of Notre Dame, which featured this scene, manages to keep the G rating. Anyways.
Given that that movie's very similar thematically, it only made sense for that movie to come out around the same time. So how did it turn out?
Most of us may already know the story of Exodus, but for brevity's sake, here's the rundown. Ancient Egypt was ruled under a tyrannical pharaoh who enslaved the Jews and murdered their firstborn sons in fear of overpopulation.
Saying that makes me realize why Disney passed on this in like 20 different ways, but let's continue.
One of the last surviving Jews was adopted by the pharaoh with little knowledge of his origins other than arriving in a basket on the Nile. He grows up in royalty, learns his true origins, speaks to God, and saves his people through the most metal way possible.
Death, pestilence, locusts, frogs, plagues on your houses, kill your firstborns.
Moses and the Jews find refuge after they cross the Red Sea, escape the clutches of the Egyptians, and live happily ever after. Well, the movie makes you feel that way. Moses doesn't get to the Holy Land. His people continue to struggle for millennium through genocide, racism, and even when they get to that Holy Land, have to continuously struggle to stay there. But hey, at least we got the 15 commandments out of this.
Hey. 10 commandments!
So, you see why Disney passed on this?
I think it's a great effort for Disney and DreamWorks to try and make more mature animated films that didn't just cater to children, but with that said, it needed a little more balance. In fact, even before these movies, we can make a sensible argument that Pinocchio was the first film to really push the envelope on what constituted a family movie. No joke, I don't think I'll ever watch this movie with the lights closed. Try watching Lampwick's transformation without peeing yourself. I know it's heavily debated on whether this was more accepted in the past compared to today's standards, but when you compare what Disney was making and which movies ended up making more money, Dumbo, which was not nearly as edgy as Pinocchio, ended up making more and setting more tones and themes that would establish the Disney formula. The same goes for The Prince of Egypt. While this movie has an identity, I don't think it really resonated with a specific crowd. Were they trying to go for the Bible crowd? I think so, since the first time I saw this movie was with my Catholic school class. My Monsignor was like, "Hey, go get these permission slips signed, see the movie, and we'll talk about it." We did, and after seeing the movie, this was his reaction.
So, that was a thing. Don't covet your neighbor, don't covet your wife. Page 52, let's go.
Which brings me to the second point. Was this made for kids? I mean, on one hand, you have the Pharaoh's priest played by Steve Martin and Martin Short, who serve as comic relief. Add some anthropomorphic camels, and that's most of the traditional kid stuff you get in this film. Its visuals, characters, and story is pretty mature. I remember seeing commercials for this film, and most of what was advertised was 10% of the actual movie, mostly because there wasn't a lot of traditional kids material in it.
So with all that said, does that make it a bad movie-going experience? Absolutely not. In fact, everything I mentioned before actually makes this movie groundbreaking in that it tried to defy so many expectations and conventions in the family genre.
I just think in the long run, it wasn't the success it wanted to be because it defied a lot of these conventions. I think as far as characters go, the only one I have an issue with was Moses' wife. She was a strong character at the start of the film, but I guess because the story then becomes his, she gets left out in the curve near the end and just becomes wife. However, my favorite character is the villain Ramses, who really becomes a tragic reflection of consequence rather than the blatant bad guy most adaptations of Exodus and even the scripture make him out to be. Because he's Moses' stepbrother, he had to have some relation to the guy. This was the problem most adaptations had with Ramses, he's the bad guy. But in the film, you can tell being the blood-born relative to the pharaoh, whose goal is to make Egypt great at all costs while upholding ethically debatable traditions, was a big deal. Therefore, when you see his struggle with his brother, who is first and foremost his brother, telling him that he's doing something wrong, now added on the fact that Moses as a character is not perfect either, and we see scenes of him getting him in trouble, really conflicts him. Seeing him become the antagonist never felt out of place. I think even after he goes evil and at the third act, you can still see him struggle. The scene where he's left alone shouting for Moses is tragic when you know that he didn't just lose his brother, he lost his country, family, and his identity. Everything he was led to believe was wrong, and I really give Ralph Fiennes props for his performance. Before he became the villain in everything, this was the film that I really felt kicked that off. The visuals are amazing as well. This is some of the best traditional animation the studio's ever pursued. Now that's unfortunate, since the movies I've followed in 2D were never as big, grand, or epic as The Prince of Egypt. A lot of that's because they found their identity in another flick that kickstarted another trend, but I'm gonna get into that another time. Unlike the other traditional animated films where they would use similar angular character design, I felt it worked better here since The Prince of Egypt reflects traditional Egyptian artwork. Longer faces, sharper edges, while still seeming soft and streamlined. The same goes for the songs.
Hearing that song makes me just wanna nope. Not this review. My green screen broke, so I ain't doing it.
So, you can tell Katzenberg really wanted to make this movie work. However, the biggest problem was that this was the film destined to be DreamWorks animation, despite the fact that it's not accessible to mainstream moviegoers. At times watching this, I felt like this could be the greatest independent animated movie ever made, but because it had the big studio power to make it a mainstream movie-going experience, I can't say that. But as a movie that has lost attention and may need to be checked out again, I highly recommend it.
So given that this movie talks about religion, and I know it's a very touchy subject matter, so I don't expect you to answer this question, but if you can think about a movie-going experience that tries to tie in religion, be it a criticism of religion or a celebration of religion, comment below and let me know what you think. I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P, and thanks for watching this review on the Cartoon Palooza.